using headphones if you would like to hear the gentle mic brushing. Please stick around at the end of the video for some extended mic brushing. Now let's get right to tonight's case. Tonight we are traveling to New York. Shout out to all my friends in New York. So tonight we will be covering the case of Mike Jeffries, the former CEO of Abercrombie and Fitch. And this is a crazy story. Believe me when I say that. But isn't it always a crazy story? Seems like the stories get crazier and crazier. So anyway, this occurred between the years 1992 and 2014. So let's start with some background on Mike Jeffries. He was born around 1944, and he is currently 80 years old. So I am showing you a picture of him currently at 80. So, he was raised in Los Angeles by his parents, and his father owned a chain of party supply stores. He attended Columbia University Business School in New York and got an MBA in 1968. In 1971, he married a woman, and they had one child together, who is currently an adult. Obviously, it's been a while. Now, it seems that they are still married, but he is an openly gay man and has not lived with his wife for some time. Now, over the decades, he has worked for various clothing companies in management and merchandising, and he has been pretty successful. Now, in 1992, he began working for Abercrombie and Fitch as their CEO and chairman. Now, in the past, the store had been known for selling mainly hunting gear and other types of outdoor equipment, and it has been around since 1892. But in 1988, it was purchased by Limited Brands after it had gone bankrupt. So when Jeffrey took over the company in 1992, he completely changed the image around like a complete 180-degree turn. And he brought a lot of success to the company during the 1990s and the early 2000s. He rebuilt it as an upscale clothing store for college-aged kids, and he used sexualized marketing to build the brand. They had a quarterly catalog, which they referred to as a, quote, magalog, called A&F Quarterly, and it featured pages upon pages of scantily clad models, articles about sex and pop culture, shirtless, muscular male models were the icon of the brand, and you would clearly see it on their shopping bags, billboards, cologne bottles. And when you walked into the store, you would be greeted by an actual living model, generally a shirtless male muscular model right there in the store. And Abercrombie led the pack of teen fashion brands in the 90s, largely as a result of the image created by Mr. Jeffries, end quote. But there were a lot of problems with the image, or with the brand. In 2002, there were protests over racist t-shirts that Abercrombie had produced. So they had a whole line of shirts with graphic designs portraying Asian, like cartoons or caricatures, with slanted eyes and cone-shaped hats. One of the shirts had a slogan that said, quote, "Wong Brothers Laundry Service. 2 Wongs can make it white," end quote. So this obviously was quite offensive, and there were other similar offensive slogans. But if that sounds bad, wait till you hear this. The same year, their children's store, Abercrombie Kids, began to produce thong underwear for girls, with suggestive writing on it such as, quote, "wink wink," end quote, and, quote, "eye candy," end quote, printed on the front of the underwear. People were outraged not only by the fact that they were even selling thong underwear for girls, children, but that it had that writing on it as well. A group of former Abercrombie employees filed a class action suit in 2003 for racial discrimination. They stated that the store rarely hired minority candidates, and when they did hire them, they would keep them in the back of the store. They wouldn't have them come out and be seen by customers. Now, Abercrombie and Fitch settled for $40 million, but admitted to no wrongdoing in that case. In 2012, Bloomberg reported on an aircraft standards manual for the Abercrombie and Fitch executive jet, and it was written by Jeffries' romantic partner, whose name is Matthew Smith. Now, this man does not work for the company at all, okay? But he wrote the manual, which is supposed to be about standards for the company aircraft, okay? Now, this manual was made public due to an age discrimination lawsuit that was brought against the company by a former pilot. And inside the manual, there were 40 pages of instructions, including what kind of underwear the aircraft staff needed to wear, as well as the seating arrangements for Jeffries' dogs. So as I said, Bloomberg reported on that and let everybody know what was going on in that manual. And Jeffries made some extremely controversial statements to the press. For example, during one interview, he openly said the following, quote, "We hire good-looking people in our stores because good-looking people attract other good-looking people, and we want to market to cool, Agency Association. In 2008, which you recall was the year of the big financial crisis, so that year the corporate library named Jeffries as the, quote, highest paid worst performer of the year, after he received a compensation package valued at $71.8 million. Now that year, he had refused to lower prices or offer any discounts at the store during the financial crisis, when all the other stores were offering deals to entice people. He finally did go ahead and offer some deals beginning in September of 2009, though, but it was too late. The company posted same-store sales losses for 17 consecutive months, but they would ultimately recover in 2011, luckily. So now in 2011, his total compensation was estimated at $46,609,075, and he was once one of the best CEOs in retail. But in 2013, his compensation shrunk 72%, and he was only paid $2.24 million in that fiscal year. That's a huge difference. So his reputation sank in 2013, as you can imagine, when Herb Greenberg from the show called The Streets, he named Jeffries the worst CEO of 2013. And Jim Cramer of CNBC named Jeffries to his, quote, wall of shame, end quote. So finally, in December of 2014, Jeffries stepped down as CEO following 11 consecutive quarters of negative company comparable store sales. And the shares actually jumped up 8% after it was announced that he was leaving. And that was the biggest one-day gain in more than 9 months. So Wall Street was happy that he left. So after he left the company, they announced that they would stop using sexualized photos in marketing. They would no longer refer to the staff as models. And they said they would no longer, quote, tolerate discrimination based on body type or physical attractiveness, end quote. Now, as of 2013, Mike Jeffries was reported to be living with his partner, Matthew Smith, who was a British man, was about 20 years younger than him. They had 3 dogs, and they lived in the Hamptons in New York on a 7-acre estate, which Jeffries did ultimately sell in 2021 for $28 million. The 12,000 square foot house has 5 bedrooms, 6 baths, a 2-story library with a fireplace, a large living room with 3 sets of French doors that open to a covered porch, a smoking room, a formal dining room, a chef's kitchen, outdoor gathering space. There's also a carriage house on the grounds, a heated gunite pool surrounded by sycamore trees, a rose garden, and an orchard. And there is a path that leads to a dock for motorboats and kayaks, so it is a beautiful place. But he no longer lives there at this time. As I said, he sold it in 2021. And I believe he was spending most of much, much worse. So, in 2021, a BBC journalist named Rihanna Croxford started doing some research on the fashion industry. She was not researching Abercrombie or Jeffries. She was just doing some other fashion research as a journalist, and she happened to come across a puzzling Instagram comment written by someone who was a former Abercrombie model, and his name is Barrett Paul, or Pal, P-A-L-L. So his post said, quote, "F you Abercrombie and Fitch, and F you Abercrombie Jim," end quote. So he was part of a group online that was discussing the Me Too movement and was complaining about how it was only focusing on what was happening to women, but what about what was happening to men, specifically male models? And she contacted him. She wanted to find out his story, and she managed to gain his trust, and he wound up telling her his whole story. So he was talking about what happened to him in the year 2011 when he was 22. And this was 2021 when she was talking to him, so 10 years after this happened, he was telling her. He said that he'd been referred by a close friend of his boxers until they were past the point of consent and they were violated either with body parts or other objects. Some of them were even injected with liquid Viagra. And when I say injected, I don't mean in the arm, so you know what I'm saying. And that was if they were either incapable or unwilling to engage in the requested acts. The events were planned by a secret staff who convinced the models to sign the non-disclosure agreements, and this staff would take away the phones of the party guests before they went into the party, so they couldn't take pictures or, send any messages while they were there. Reportedly, if the model said no to anything during the party, they were told that their careers with Abercrombie would be in jeopardy. They were also not allowed to leave the party until Jeffries and his partner Smith said that it was okay for them to go. So about 2 years after she started doing the research, Rihanna Croxford and another journalist named Ruth Evans visited James Jacobson, the middleman, the one without a nose. This was August of 2023. And he was living in Wisconsin, so that is where they visited him, at his home. And they were working on a podcast focused on this subject. So he came to the door, supposedly, he sat down on the step, he put his head in his hands, and he cursed, and he tried to make a deal. He said, quote, "Leave my name out and I'll tell you everything," end quote. So they agreed to meet up at a coffee shop, and they spoke for 2 hours. The journalist described the meeting with Jacobson as bizarre at times. She said he complimented her on her shorthand, on whatever she was writing about the conversation they were having. He also complimented her British accent. He called her sweetheart, and he showed off his own acting skills, such as his ability to speak in many different accents. He joked about his missing nose. Now, we don't know exactly what happened to it, but the rumor is that he had too much plastic surgery, and that's why he has no nose, but I don't know if that's true. So he joked about his nose, and he said that the only kind of acting parts he could get now are as villains. And he was acting very charismatic throughout the whole thing. He claimed he hadn't spoken to Jeffries or Smith since 2015, and that whatever he was doing, he was just, quote, doing his job, end quote. But they did not grant him the deal that he requested, and they did not keep his name out of the story. So I don't think he told them everything they wanted to know in exchange. I don't think they tricked him, they just did not take him up on the deal. So their podcast came out. It was called World of Secrets, The Abercrombie Guys. And a documentary was also made called The Abercrombie Guys, The Dark Side of Cool. And this was in the fall of 2023. So in the documentary, former models spoke about how they had performed sexual favors in hopes that they could become models for Abercrombie. One man said that when he went to a party, he remembers Jeffries trying to kiss him, and then he believes his drink was spiked and he blacked out. The next morning he woke up and he found a condom inside of him. He said, quote, "When I put things together, I believe there is a very good possibility I was drugged and raped. I'll probably never know for sure the answer of what happened," end quote. David Bradbury, a model who identifies as straight, said that Jacobson allegedly made So according to the lawsuit, this went on from at least 1992 until 2014. And it was alleged that over 100 young models were possibly victimized. Through Jeffries' lawyers, he responded with, quote, "No comment in the press on this new lawsuit," end quote. A year later, on October 22nd, 2024, so very recently, Jeffries, Smith, and Jacobson were indicted by federal prosecutors in the United States District Court for the Eastern District of New York on criminal charges of sex trafficking and interstate prostitution involving 15 unnamed accusers. So this is completely separate from the civil case from October of 2023. So he has two things going on, the civil case and the federal case. So according to the indictment on the federal case, Jacobson, Jeffries, and Smith paid for dozens of men to travel to engage in sex with them and other men in New York and at hotels in England, France, Italy, Morocco, and St. Bart's between 2008 and 2015. The men were given drugs, lubricant, condoms, costumes, toys, and sometimes injections that caused painful, hours-long reactions. Now, according to the indictment, the men were not told ahead of time what they would be expected to do. Some were led to believe it would be a typical photo shoot, and they were all required to sign non-disclosure agreements. The defendants led the men into thinking that refusing to engage in the sexual encounters would harm their chances of getting a job for Abercrombie. According to the indictment, the men typically had, quote, tryouts by having sex first with Jacobson, who acted as a recruiter for his bosses, Jeffries and Smith. It was stated in a news conference that prosecutors have, quote, a lot of evidence, end quote, including travel records, financial documents, and testimony from accusers and witnesses. And prosecutors do not allege that Abercrombie and Fitch, the company, has anything to do with this. Their money and property were not used in this scheme. Now, if these men are convicted, they face a maximum of life in prison. 80-year-old Mike Jeffries pled not guilty to all charges, as did 71-year-old James Jacobson. And they have both bonded out. Jeffries was released on $10 million bail, using his house as collateral, and he must wear a GPS monitor. Jacobson bonded out with $500,000. Both of them are due back in court in December in Long Island. Now, 61-year-old Matthew Smith is considered a flight risk due to his having both a UK and US passport, so he is being held without bail, and he is also denied any wrongdoing. And that is the case. What are your thoughts? I will share some of mine. First of all, my heart goes out to all of the victims. I think they were very brave to come out and share their stories, and I do believe that many more men will come out now that the story has made it to the news. I think other victims will come out and share their story. So people who thought that their career was at risk or they had something to gain by doing it. So, why is that? Obviously, he got off on the power. He liked being in charge. He liked instilling fear in people. And I don't know much about his partner, Matthew Smith, but I know he was engaged in this as well, so I don't have any good thoughts about him. And my thoughts about James Jacobson, he just seems like one of the most creepy people out there. But I guess he must have been thinking he hit the jackpot with the job that he got. He was being paid probably tons of money to do what he did. Now, I've also been thinking about Jeffries' career with Abercrombie. Now, we know that he brought them huge success with his strategies at first. And whether or not you approve of his strategies, they were working. Okay? So the sex was selling. So why couldn't he just leave it at that? You know, why did he have to go and destroy the brand temporarily? Through all of his controversial statements and controversial products and his discriminatory ways. Why did he do any of that? And when times were rough for everyone financially in 2008, why couldn't he have a few sales here and there like everyone else, like all the other stores were doing? No, he couldn't do that, and made the company look to be not compassionate to the struggles of most people in the US. I believe that Jeffries is a man who destroyed himself professionally and personally in a huge way. Now, I believe the strategy that they're all going to be using is that everyone who went to the parties, everyone who was involved, was there consensually, that they all knew exactly what they were doing, that no one was forced into anything. They were just people who were invited to these parties. They knew what was going to be going on. They agreed to do all of it. They weren't forced. They weren't held against their will. And they were not given a job due to attending. So I believe that is the strategy. But do I believe that? No. I mean, I believe it's different for different people, you know, different party guests, if we can call them that. Like, some of them said they thought they were going to just a regular photo shoot, so they were completely in the dark. Then there were others who expected that there would be a little bit of inappropriate behavior that they would have to engage in, but they didn't realize the extent of it. So I believe that regardless of how they wound up at the parties, they were all victims because they were being forced to do more than what they bargained for. And the fact